All right, we're looking at Leviticus chapter 14 here and just have two questions. The first question, at what point was the leper clean? Verse 3 of chapter 14 says, "And the priest shall go forth out of the camp, and the priest shall look, and behold, if the plague of leprosy be healed in the leper." Verse 4, "Then shall the priest command to take for him to be cleansed 2 birds, alive and clean, and cedar wood," and continues through, and this is the process then if a person has been healed. Well, the question is, at what point is the leper clean? Arguably, they're clean at this point, because this process only begins if they have been, it says healed, that's the word that's used, but healed, in other words, they're cleansed. The leprosy was what made them unclean. You remember in chapter 13, if a person is determined to have leprosy, they're said to be unclean. They have to say unclean, unclean. But now they don't have leprosy anymore. The priest has evaluated them and determined they don't have leprosy anymore. And at that point, literally, physically, they are actually clean. But here it's referring to the person in verse 4 as for him that is to be cleansed. So in another sense, they're not yet cleansed here in verse 4. Then jump down to verse 7, and it says, "You shall sprinkle on him that is to be cleansed." So they're still to be cleansed, not cleansed yet, 7 times, "and pronounce him clean." So it seems that's it. It's at this point here in verse 7 that they're pronounced clean, and it says they are clean. And so we'd assume they're clean. It jumped down to verse 9, and at the end of verse 9 it says, "And also he shall wash his flesh in water, and he shall be clean." But then look in verse 11, "The priest that makes him clean shall present the man that is to be made clean." He's still to be made clean. We thought he was clean before, but according to verse 11, he's still yet to be made clean. And if you continue down, you skip all the way down to verse 18, it refers to him again, "A remnant of the oil that is in the priest's hand, he shall pour on the head of him that is to be cleansed." And so here, even now in verse 18, he's still not cleansed. He's still to be cleaned. And then again, the last time in verse 20, at the end of verse 20, it says, "And he shall be clean." What we see here is that in the beginning of the process, we would have thought the person is clean. And indeed, they are physically clean of the leprosy, or they would not be here in the first place. But then he's still referred to as to be cleansed. And then it says he's pronounced clean, but yet still he has to be cleansed later after that. And then he says he's clean in verse 9. And then in verse 11, again, he's referred to as not being clean. And so through the process, there seems to be a back and forth. Is he clean or is he not clean? Well, the most reasonable way to harmonize these verses, to make this make sense, is to introduce the idea of from what perspective are we talking about? He's clean, yes, you can be clean from multiple perspectives. Are you physically clean in terms of the leprosy? Well, we looked at that from the beginning. They wouldn't be in this process if they were not physically clean. So indeed, from that point, the point they begin the process, they are clean physically from the leprosy. But then we have here some sprinkling of blood, sprinkling of oil, some birds flying around, cedar, hyssop. We have some other elements here that are going to make them ceremonially clean. And so, for example, a woman, when she's on her menstruation period, she was considered unclean. Now, she may have been physically clean. She may have had a bath, but she was considered unclean. That's ceremonially. In terms of the sanctuary, she couldn't approach the sanctuary, couldn't come into the tabernacle grounds during that time because she's ceremonially unclean, though she may be clean physically. And similarly with the leper here, they're clean physically, but not yet ceremonially clean. And then, so some of the process is addressing that, the fact that they're not ceremonially clean. Another perspective we could say, it's not explicitly here, but another perspective we can look at them as not being clean from in the eyes of the congregation. Yes, they were clean physically, but they had not been pronounced clean by the priest, which would declare before all the congregation, all that knew of the person would know, oh, now he's clean. And so even though they are physically clean, even though they may have been ceremonially clean, not until the priest makes this pronouncement are they clean in the minds of the community. But then all of this required, towards the end, a sin offering to be made. And so they had to be cleansed by the sin offering, and they had an atonement made for them. That's in verse 18, as well as mentioned in verse 20. And the priest makes an atonement for him, and he shall be clean. And so in that sense, he's cleansed legally in terms of the sin offering, the law. But the point I want to make sure we see from this is that there are different perspectives from which to see their cleansing. So if you ask the leper, are you clean? His response would be, well, clean from what? Am I clean from leprosy? Yes, from the beginning. Am I cleansed ceremonially? No, not yet. Am I cleansed in the minds of the people? No, not yet. Am I cleansed legally? Maybe other perspectives. But he could say, yes, he is clean, and also still yet to be clean. And this goes to the next question. How can this help us answer the question, at what point are we saved? The New Testament refers to Christians as being saved in the past. They have been saved. Those who were saved, we've been redeemed. Those they're referred to as saints. It talks about our salvation as a past tense thing. The moment we put our faith in Jesus, we are justified entirely. And then at that point, we can truly say we are saved. So yes, we're saved. But there's also a sense in which we are not yet saved. Because though we are saved from the penalty of sin at that point, though we are saved from the guilt of sin, at the moment that we put our faith in Jesus, still, unfortunately, we find ourselves falling in sin. We still find ourselves falling in temptation, still under the power of sin. Sin is still present in our life. We're still suffering from the effects of sin. We still have the results of sin in our life. And we're not yet saved from that. So yes, we are saved, but no, we're not yet saved. Also, we're here in this sinful planet where sin reigns. Satan, unfortunately, has a great deal of dominion over this planet. So there's innocent lives that are lost. There's abuse and molestation. There's wars. There's poverty, there's hunger, there's all kinds of evil that take place in this world. That's sin. Those are the results of sin. And so, no, we're not yet saved from that. And so that's when Jesus says, when you see these things happening, look up, because your redemption draws nigh. Your salvation is coming soon. Our salvation is still yet to come. So we can see here, just as we see in the case of the leper in Leviticus 14, that there are different perspectives from which we can look at our salvation. And so we can say, in one sense, yes, we are saved. But in another sense, we are still waiting to be saved. And in another sense, we are still being saved. So hopefully this helps us in understanding this sometimes tricky question, are you saved?